Hello, welcome back to the channel for another tutorial on supply chain analytics. Unlike the previous videos, today we will not use Python or JavaScript. Python can be very impressive for automation, data science, and analytics. However, in the real world of operations and supply chain management, Excel remains the universal language. I wanted to use an example to introduce you to the programming language that can help you to automate Excel spreadsheets, Visual Basic for applications, or also called VBA. With VBA, you can automate repetitive tasks, but also create your own analytics tools inside Excel that can be used by you or your colleague. For me, this was a great way to start learning programming that led me to learn Python later and JavaScript. This is why I wanted to share that with you today. So what are we going to do? In this tutorial that I designed for complete beginners, we are going to put ourselves in the shoes of a supply chain solution manager, which was my job 10 years ago. I was using VBA to automate complex calculations for the sizing and the quotation of warehousing and transportation solutions in the context of RFPs. I will start with a very simple exercise just to build the basic foundations of VBA. The idea will be to process sales orders. So we are going to convert volumes from boxes into pallets and pieces using multiple parameters. This will be the opportunity for you to learn the basics, the core fundamentals of VBA programming, how to create a procedure, how to introduce a variable, how to create a for loop, how to read and change the values of specific cells inside an Excel, and what you need to do to optimize the computing of your code for speed and accuracy. This will be for you the opportunity to build your toolbox so you can automate your own calculations inside your Excels. And then in the second part, I will share with you the type of automations that I was using when I needed to calculate a specific price for multiple scenarios. The idea will be to use VBA to take static calculations that are done for a specific scenario and then transport that into an infinity of scenarios using the automation of VBA. What do you need to follow the tutorial? You only need Excel, where you will need to set up the VBA option, and we can do that together, and no coding experience, just curiosity. Great, let me give you a bit of context, right? So what are we going to do here? As I said, we are going to put out in the shoes of a supply chain solution manager, which was my job 10 years ago. So usually in my day-to-day job, I'm participating in RFPs, requests for proposal, where a retailer, for instance, is asking to estimate the price for order preparation and loading. So let's imagine that we work for a retail company. This retail company is sending replenishment orders to the warehouse. So they say, okay, I want this SKU with this number of units or boxes. The warehouse receives that in the warehouse management systems. Operators prepare the order, so they go in the rack, taking full boxes or pieces, put that on a pallet, film that, and load that in trucks for delivery. What do we want to do here? So we are going to get as input data this replenishment or picking orders, depending on who you are. And then the volumes will be in boxes. So the first exercise will be to convert that into pallets and pieces. This could be done with normal Excel, but the idea here in this first exercise is to introduce all the basic fundamentals of VBA. Then we will use these fundamentals for the second exercise, where we are going to estimate number of operators you need for box picking, piece picking, and pallet loading. And for that, we are going to use two sheets that are doing the calculation, and VBA will be used to change the parameters so we can do the calculation for 25 scenarios. Because if you take the sheets and you want to change the scenarios, you need to do it manually. We are going to use VBA to estimate all these scenarios. Let me show you that in the Excel. So here is the Excel file that we are going to use. You will be able to download it in the link shared in the description and in the first comment. Basically, it's a simple Excel file with these sales orders or like picking orders that I told you about. So the first column is the SKU number, then you have the item number. The difference between SKU and item is that an item is linked to a store. You have the family, the store number. I think we have like 9 stores. It will not be useful here. What is important for us is the quantities. So the first exercise here is that we only have the quantities in boxes. We are going to build a macro that will convert this quantity in boxes into pallets and pieces using parameters that are here, but also inside the code. You will tell me it's completely useless. We can definitely do that with a formula. Yes, the idea here is just to do the exercise of creating a first simple macro so you have the ability to learn the different basics in terms of how to create a procedure, how to introduce a variable. And I wanted to use this simple exercise for that. So the macro is called volumes conversion. I run it. It's highly inefficient. The idea here is to build something simple. Then boom, we have the quantities in pallets. We have 82,000 pallets, and in pieces we should have like several millions. Anyhow, we have also the volumes in weeks. And basically here, the idea is keep in mind that we have families and weeks. This will be used to calculate the different scenarios. What do we need the scenarios? Is to estimate the number of operators that we need for the order preparation and the loading. So the order preparation is to take the items from the racks and to put them on a pallet. And for that, let's imagine that you are in RFP, and in the RFP, the customer will tell you that we have multiple scenarios. Maybe in some scenarios, we only have 4 families out of 6 or 9, and we want you to estimate the price for each of them. So you build this kind of calculation where you have parameters like week start, week end, because maybe the scope of time would be different. You have the picking productivity in boxes and pieces, the number of working hours, and here you have the split of volumes per family. If you have a cross here, that means you don't consider this family. If it's a V, that means you take you consider this family. So then you have all the different volumes. So the total volumes in boxes converted into pieces. Here you have an assumption of the percentage of items that are picked by boxes and pieces. So here you could see that for the family 8 and 9, this is different. And then you have the number of boxes picked and the number of pieces picked. And it's used to calculate with the productivity the number of FTEs you need for box picking and piece picking for the different families. You have the total, and then the total is summed to say that for this specific scenario, you need 42 people for box picking. You do the same for pallet loading. So normally the scenarios of volumes are the same. So the different families that are taken or not taken. We take volumes of pallets, number of truck receptions, and then we can calculate a number of operators for the pallet loading using the pallet productivity. The question is here, why do we need a VBA? Let's say, for instance, that this is like one scenario, but I want to know what happened if, for instance, we also consider family 3. What happened here if we take from week 1 to week 4? For that, you will need to manually change the variables, like the parameters. And when you are a solution manager, like I was, you need to be fast because you have a limited time to do your quotations. So you need to be able to find a way to automatically calculate this number of FTEs for multiple scenarios in one click. For that, I have created this sheet, so the scenario sheet, where here you have the scenario ID, so you have up to 22 scenarios. For each scenario, you have different time scope. So for instance, the first one is starting week 1 and is ending week 3. But if you take the 7th one, it's starting week 1 and is ending week 4. And then for each different scenarios, you have different scopes of volumes. So for instance, here, for the scenario 1, you don't consider family 3, you don't consider family 5 and family 7. But if you look at the final scenarios, you consider all the families. So here, clearly, is the type of analysis and calculations that I was doing when I was doing RFPs. Maybe a bit more complicated, but the idea here is to simulate different scenarios because, for instance, the customer can give you a volume of 100, but the actual volume will be 80. And you need to be able to estimate the price for that. So that way, during negotiations, you have a kind of leverage in terms of knowledge of the potential scenarios. Here also in the scenarios, I have put different productivities. So the picking and productivities remain the same, but in the last scenarios, you increase the pallet loading productivity. And for each scenario, what you want to know is the number of FTEs, which will be linked then to total cost to company, because you will be able to multiply that by the number, the costs you have per FTEs. How are we going to do that? If you look at the column Z, the most important parameter is what you have at the cell 3Z, which is basically the scenario ID that you select. So for instance, let me put here like 12. Now, here, the scenario 12 is selected. So the week start is the week start of 12, so 1, and the week end is 4. Then we are selecting the right families of the scenario 12, sorry. And then we are also selecting the right productivities. And here, this is where the calculation is starting. So we calculate the number of weeks that you have in the scope. And since we are between 1 and 4, we have 3 weeks. And these parameters are then sent to order preparation. If you look here, see, you are taking the column Z, 4, 5, 14, 15. And here you are doing some calculation based on the parameters here. And all the rest of the calculation are basically depending on these parameters that are taken from this column. So basically, when you are selecting a specific scenario, and it's the same for loading. If I go to loading, scenario Z, 4, 5, and then the productivity is the same. And then you take the pallet loading productivity is taken from the column Z, and all the different volumes here are taken from the column Z. So basically, this column will tell you which scenario you are currently calculating. And if you change the column, you will change the scenario. So the idea of the macro that we are going to build is to change the ID from 1 to 22 and then copy the values here in each columns. So let me show you how it's working. So I run the macro. Have you seen? It went quite fast. I don't know if I will be able to slow it down, but basically the IDs were going from 1 to 22, and each time the values here were copied here. And what you can see here is now the calculation for all the different scenarios. And this type of results were used by me when I was creating these quotation sheets. So now that we know what we can do, we are going to start to build these macros. So get ready to code. Okay, so now that we know what we want to do, so let me do some cleaning. So I will clean the results here. I will also clean the results here. And I will show you how to set up your Excel to perform some macros. So you go on this ribbon, more commands, so this kind of options. Then you go on add-ons, manage the add-ons, Excel add-ins. And here you are supposed to have analysis 2-pack, analysis 2-pack VBA. You click on both. And then if you restart Excel, you are supposed to see that. After you have done that, we can start coding. Great, so now we can start building macros. But before, maybe let me show you the tool, I would say, the best helper that you will have when you are starting to learn coding with VBA, which is the record macro tool. So the idea of this tool is that you are performing a specific task and you record it with this tool, and then this tool will transcript the task into VBA code. And this is how I learned how to write VBA programming, because VBA code, because then you don't start from a blank page. You can link some code with specific task, and then you just have to tweak the parameters. So maybe let me show you like a very simple example. So I will start to record. I will call that test record. And then what I'm going to do is I will just select these 4 cells and I will put the color yellow. And then I will go back and stop recording. So now, if we view macro, we edit test macro, what we could see here is what we call here a procedure, which is the equivalent of a function here, but the procedure is not returning anything, it's just performing some task. All this code has been generated by the tool, not by myself. And then, instead of looking at the documentation, which would be the best way to do, what you can do is just reverse engineer what has been done in this small piece of code. So here you have something called range, that is select, so you can guess that is the selection of the cells, and you select from J2 to J5. And if I go back here, J2 to J5 is exactly what I selected. And then here, what you do is you are taking the selection, the interior, and you are putting some colors. So then, how would you play, with VBA to get familiar with that? What kind of simple exercise that you could do is maybe change from G5 to G10. If you are not familiar with code, it's the first good way to learn how to play with it. And then you take the color back, you run it again, view macros, boom. And now you have the 10 cells that are colored. Let's go back to the macro. Sorry, I lost the window. So the macro is here. So now what we did is the range from G10 to G2 to G10. What we can guess is the range is basically the range of cells. What if, for instance, we start the range from H, right? We save that. We come back to initial, and it's supposed probably to start here and to have a square. I don't know. I know, but let's assume that we don't know. Boom. So here, I won't go that much in details on this tool. It can be a good way for you to start to get familiar with the coding of VBA by playing with this recording tool. It's a good way, and it's a way that I used for myself to start learning programming. And then you have the chance that I didn't have in the past to have ChatGPT to be able to help you to write code for more advanced tasks. But now we can go back to our initial tutorial and perform the first exercise, which is sales, which is basically the processing of these sales orders or like picking orders. Okay, so now that we have introduced this record macro tool, so that you can use to play with code, now we can start the actual tutorial. And as I told you, the first exercise will be to process these picking orders with doing the simple exercise of just converting the number of boxes into pallets and pieces. So let's go back here, view macros. We are going to create a macro. It's like procedure. We can call that volumes conversion. And then what you can see here is that we have the procedure created. So then the first step, that's the first thing I learned when I studied the VBA. I was using a book for that I was given during an internship. And in the book, in the first page, you say, make sure that you are declaring your variable in the right way. And for that, you need to tell VBA if you want, Visual Basic, if you want the compiler to declare the variable instead that are not declared, or let you the total control on it. And for most of the time, you want the total control on it for debugging to make sure that if there is an issue, it's probably due to you. So for that, you just add this option, it's called explicit, where we say that each variable that are used should be declared. That's a good practice. Then in terms of syntax, so here for me, I like to indent, maybe it's my reflex of Python. If you want to write a comment, you just need this character. And for instance, here, what we can create as a comment is declare variables. So if you're not familiar with programming language, basically comments are part of the code, but not considered as code. It's where you can put some information, so later when you are coming back to your code, you know exactly which bits of code are doing. It will not be executed by the compiler, so you don't worry about what you put inside. It's just for the human eye, basically. So now we can declare the variables, and we have to because we have put the explicit variable, the explicit option. So maybe when you are doing macros, the first thing to declare and the first thing to have in mind is where to take the information. And for that, you have several granularity, but the first one is, the biggest one is the workbook. So sometimes you have macros that can use other workbooks. We are not going to do that today, but we are going to have only workbook, and workbook is an Excel file. But inside the Excel file, you may have multiple sheets. And here in our case, we have multiple sheets. So for our first exercise, we are going to perform the calculation in the worksheet volumes, but we are going to take parameters in the worksheet parameters. So we need to define variables to store the name of the worksheet volumes and the name of the worksheet parameters. So that's what we are going to do here. So we define WS as a worksheet variable. So here, every time, when you are going to assign a value to WS, now the compiler will know that is a worksheet. We're going to do the same for the one with parameters. Now we'll call that params. Now that we're good, then a good thing to know is, so what we are going to do is we are going to perform a for loop, to calculate the conversion of the boxes into pallets and pieces. So we are going to start from the the row 2, to the end of the row, which is 100,000, I don't know. The row 2 could be fixed, right? This is like a value that we can find ourselves. But for the last row, we need to calculate that. And so if we calculate it, we need to store the value. So we need to define a variable for that. So we can call that last row as long. And long is a type of variable that will store integers that could be high value, long. So for most of the time, you can use long. If you want later to optimize your code, you can use others. But here, if you are a beginner, just to avoid any issues, just put long every time that you have an integer. Here, I will put a comment to say the last row of the first worksheet. You see, this will not be considered in the computation, but it's good for you to know, even if the name is quite explicit, later when we are going to take a look back at the code, you know exactly what you're doing. So then we're good with that. So now, let me come back to Excel. We know where we are in terms of worksheets. We know in which rows we are going to go. Wait a second, I don't like when it's like this. Yes. And so now we know the rows, but we need to know where we are going to the columns. So I will add some variables to locate the columns. And for that, we have, what do we have? We have a column for the box, quantity in boxes. We have the column for quantity in pallets, and we have the column for quantity in pieces. So we need 3 variables. So dim call pal as long. Again, probably we don't need long, but for simplicity, same for call box, and then a column for the pieces. And we call that pieces as, long. Okay, it looks like a bit long for you, but later then it will be a good, and a reflex to define the variables. But because what you will see is that most of the time, the issue that we are going to face is an issue of variable definitions. Then, so here, what our macro is going to do, our macro is going to take the quantity of boxes and then divide it by the number of boxes per pallet to calculate the number of pallets. So we need to store the quantity in boxes, we need to store the value in the parameters here, the boxes per pallet. So for that, we need variables. So we are going to define variables for the quantity, I say values, yeah. So the first one would be the number of pallets and here we can put double. What is double? Double is an integer that could be negative. Why I put that? Because, if you are working in logistics supply chain, you may have issues where you have negative quantities, for instance, in stock. So that's a good reflex to have, even if we are supposed to have only positive values. I do the same for box, and I will do the same for pieces. Okay, so now we have defined the variables. We can set the values. So, for instance, set the values of worksheets, for instance. So here, the worksheet WS is the current worksheet where we are doing the calculations. So it's supposed to be, so here you are going to use the functions worksheets, and so that's the object worksheets, and it's supposed to be the name of the index. So let me go back here, volumes. So you will see this WS will be used a lot to take specific values inside the worksheets, but also to change these values. So that's quite important here. We do the same for WS params. And here, yes, sir. I'm not used to VBA that much, and that's why. So here, WS params, I guess, parameters. Okay, and we're good. So we know where we are in terms of worksheets. And so now we need to know, if you take the order that I defined the variables, where we are in worksheets, now we need to know where is the last row. So, and then for the last row, we have a specific function that I will just copy and paste that will help us to calculate the number of rows in the column A. So calculate the last row using column A. Why column A? Because here you are looking at the range of WS, which is the first worksheet, in the column 1, which is the column A, and you look at the end. So for that, yeah, I guess here I just asked ChatGPT how to calculate the last row of a spreadsheet based on the column selected, and you can just copy and paste using this one. Okay, now we're good. We can start to prepare the calculations. So the first step here is to set the values for the different columns. So here we are going to hard code it in the code, but you can also find a more smarter way to do this. So now we can start to prepare the calculations. So now we know where we are in terms of worksheets, where we in terms of scope, like range of rows. Now we need to know where we are in columns. So you can find a smart way to find the right columns based on the values. Here I will just hard code it because it's supposed to be like introduction tutorial. So I'll call that prepare calculations. So let's start first with call box. So the number of box, which probably is so if I go back here, the column box is that so if you look here on the top left, you will see the range is going up to 7C, so it's the column 7. The index starts with 1. So call box is 7, then call pal should be 8, and call pieces should be 9. So at this stage now, we have all the different variables needed to know where we are. So we can start tackling the calculations. So here we are going to build the for loop to calculate the volumes in pieces and pal. Bam, bam, bam. Great. So the first parameter we need to calculate from box to pieces is the number of pieces per box. So we defined the number of pieces per box. Here it should be an integer, so we do long. And here we can directly, so this is another syntax. Here we can define and set the value in the same row. That's what I wanted to show you. So here we do it in 2 times. Here we can do it. I want to show you that we can also do it in one line. So pieces per box equals, and here 12. For the number of pieces per box, we just hard-coded in the code. But I wanted to show you that we can also take a parameter from the Excel spreadsheet. So this is what we are going to do here. The number of boxes per pallet as long. And here, boxes per pallet. So we should take it from here. So it's in the worksheet parameters and it's in C3. So 3rd row, 3rd column. So here we need to get located in the worksheet WMS params, right? For that, we have a function called range. This function range, is the one that was used in the recording tool, right? To locate some cells. So here, instead of having a range between two cells, we only take one. And here the syntax when you are using range, instead of here where you are using cells where you are supposed to put 2 integers, here you just put the name of the cell. So here C3. So what do we do here? We define the number of boxes per pallet and we ask to take it from the worksheet called parameters in the range in the cell C3. Okay? So now that we have defined, what we can do is maybe, you know what? We can do some tests. So here, let me see. If I go back to volumes and I take the cell L1, right? So that one which is at the top. Let's just check that everything is working. So put that on test. We are going to remove that. WS params dot range L1. And here, I just want to put the value of, wait a second, let me finish, boxes per pallet, right? And you know what? I will do the same for M. But here, I will take the number of pieces per box. It's just for us to test that everything is working and for you to show, because so far we only have declared variables. So it may be frustrating for you because you are writing code, but you don't know if it's doing anything. Now we go back here. We have our macro, rerun it, and nothing happens. Great. That's a great opportunity for us. No, wait a second. Wait a second. Of course, I took the wrong worksheet. So it wrote that in the worksheet params instead of putting it in the first one. So let me just go back here. Yeah, you see the values are here, but anyhow, for the sake of exercise, let me just do it again. Now I took the right worksheet. Boom. You could see the macro took the parameters, like the values from here and the one that is hard-coded, and it pasted it here. So you start to sense what we are going to do here. Let me go back here, go back to the code, remove that because we don't need that. So what we did here is we only changed the value of one cell. But now what we want to do is we want to go from the first row here, like the row 2, to the last row that you can find on which is the row 132 501. So that would be a for loop that we can build here. Okay, so how we build a for loop? You start with 4. You start with the first index. So the first index is the second row, so 2. And here, last row. But for the sake of the exercise, I'm going to comment this and just only do it to 5. Why? Because a for loop can be extremely slow, especially that here I haven't shown you yet how to optimize the code. So maybe just here, just to test, to debug, let's just do it up to row 5, right? And so for each row, so now the index, so basically the index will move from 2 to 3, 4, 5. Each time the index value is set, we need to perform some calculation on it. So what we could do, the first thing is we need to calculate the number of, calculate the quantities in boxes and in pallets and pieces. So we have defined the variable pal, right? Pal equals to, so the number of box. And how do we set in the number of box? The number of box, sorry, I forgot. So here, take the number of boxes. So box should be equal to, so we are in WS, right? Here we can use the cells function instead of the range. The row would be I, and the column would be call box. I guess now you start to link the different boxes, or I don't know how to call that. So we are using the variables that we were defining in the top, right? So now here inside box, we have the number of box. And I will show you how you use the debugging tool to see how things are working. So then we have the number of boxes that we want to convert here in number of pallets. For that, you divide by boxes per pallet. And here, pieces, which will be box, now that we multiply by pieces per box. Okay, so now that we have stored the values here, what we need to do is to write these values in cells. And the same way that we did in the test that I showed you before. So what do we start first? Is WS, because we are in the first worksheet. I'm going to use cells, is in the same row, but now it's called pal equals to, no, it's not going to work here because you need to put dot value. You need to set the value of these cells at pal. And here I can give you a bit of tip. You can round it to make it more beautiful. And here we want to round it to 2. Now I would like to do the same with boxes. And here I take box. Okay. Second thing that I learned in the book that I used to study VBA, which was more than 10, 12 years ago, never forget to close a loop with next. Okay? So it should be good at this stage. I mean, it should be good. It should work. And to do that, I'm going to test it. Go back here. I will, so maybe just move that. I will go back here and I will just test this macro that is supposed to change the values here from 2 to 5. So I go here and run the macro. Boom, error. Yes. So you see, we are learning together. We haven't defined the index for the loop. So this error message took us to the debugger. So now we are in the debugger. So that could be a good opportunity for us to have a look at this great tool that will help you to debug your code. So now that you arrive at that level, what you can do, or just to be at that stage, you just have to press F8, right? So press F8, you will arrive at this first row. Then continue to press. And basically this tool will help you to run the code iteration by iteration to see what is happening. So for instance, here we have defined I as long and the value is set as 0. Then here in that row, we have set WS as the worksheet volumes. We do the same for WS params. Then we calculate the last row. And if you go here, you have the value, which corresponds to the value of the end of the row. You do the same for call box, call pieces. Then when you put the cursor on top of call box and call pal and call pieces, you have the values. Do the same with these two variables that you defined. So that's a great way to see what is happening. Now that we are going to start our loop, so the first step of the loop is to take the value box. Yes, so we take it from the cell 2, 7, and the value is 3. Now let me go back here. Yes, the first value is 3. I continue. The same for, so now we calculate the number of pallets. So you take the number of boxes and you divide by the number of boxes per pallet, and the value is 0.6. You do the same for the number of pieces. Now that's the key part where we are writing. So here on the cell 2, call pal 8, we are supposed to write 0.6. Yes, is exactly what we're doing. And then we do the same for the call box value. And if you look at here, wrong. I made a mistake here. It's not call box, it's call pieces. So anyhow, so we can continue. We do the same here. The value is 0, so we put 0. Yeah, that's exactly here. Now the value is 0 also. Oh yeah, we're unlucky. Let me continue. Now the value is 3, 0.6, 36. And then we arrive at the end of the loop and we end the procedure. So we did that with the debugger. Here we can see the result except for here because I made a mistake with the number of columns. Let me run it now. Boom. What you could see is that it's working pretty well. It's the same result that you had before. The only thing here is what you could see is that we only had 5 rows, but it's pretty slow because the code is not optimized. So what we are going to do before expanding the loop to the full scope, we are going to optimize the code. So now basically what we are going to do is to optimize the code to ensure that the processing is quite fast, I would say. Excel, and that's why I moved to Python. Excel is not done to optimize the calculation at the high speed because it's a spreadsheet, so it's supposed to be manually used. But we have some ways to, when we are using macros, to make things faster. And for that, I will just copy and paste some chunks of code and I will explain you what it's doing. So first here. First, we are going to define a variable called prevCalc. So previous calculation. Here, what do we do? So when you are using Excel, you have some options on the refreshing of the calculation. So for instance, if at one sheet you are creating a formula and then you press enter, the value will be updated in the formula here. But sometimes, I mean most of the times, the whole workbook will update the formulas because in case you have some connections between the different worksheets. If you do that with your for loop, basically for the 130K plus rows, each time that you are going to set a value, Excel will rerun all the calculation. And when you have a huge sheet, it can impact your processing time. So what you want to do is you want to save these setups to say, okay, what has been done, what the user wants at the current time. Then you want to set everything off. So that's the first function here. So fast on. So we keep here the default or the current settings. And then we set everything at off. So screen updating is we don't want to update the screen. Enable events. So we don't want every time that like a new calculation, a pivot table needs to be recalculated. We don't want to be it done. So that way we save computation for the macro itself. And here, so manual, which means here application.calculation.manual, which means that if you want a cell to be recalculated, you have to press enter on the cell. But for that, the only thing is don't update the cell's calculation automatically every time that there is a new value. So it's basically what I explained to you. So this function will be set at the beginning of the function of the procedure. So that way, all the calculation here will be done in a scenario, in a setup where everything is optimized for the macro. And then we are going to revert back to the settings that were before, and we are going to enable events and screen updating. So this is this function here. So what you could see here is like this function is kind of opening the door to run the macro, and this is closing the door, leaving everything in a state that is exactly the same as before. So we have defined these two functions, then we need to add them in the code. So for that, on the top, you put fast on. And on the bottom, you put fast off. If you do that, things will work perfectly, except if you have an error. Because if you have an error, your code will stop at the stage of the error. So you will still be on fast on. But then when you are going to use the Excel, you will still be in these setups where things will not be updated. So you will not understand. You will press a formula and the value will not change. So we need to find a way to ensure that when we have an error, we still come back to the initial setups. And for that, we have this piece of code, which I called clean exit. So the idea here is basically if we go to the path of clean exit, we show and usually it's coming from an error. We show the error message, and then we can close the door. But to be able to use this clean exit, which is not an exit where you stop only at the error stage, what you need to do is to, and I will add this piece of code, is to explain to the procedure that if you have an error, please go to clean exit. So let's imagine that you have an error here. For instance, I don't know, this function is not working, or you have an issue in there. Instead of stopping the execution at this stage and not doing the fast off, we want you to make sure that you go on that stage, you show the error. So here, message box is a functionality that I didn't introduce to you, sorry, that basically helps you to create this message. And it's supposed to be an error, and here we are going to show the error, but that's not the main thing here. What is important is that you're forced to go to fast off. Okay, so first, now let me try to relaunch the macro for these 5 lines, and you will see the improvement in terms of speed. Yeah, it looks faster, right? Now that we have that, I am confident to open the loop. I mean, not opening the loop, but expanding the range to the last row. Can do that. Let me go back to the sheet. I run the macro. It's still slow. Probably we have some optimization to do, but in a couple of seconds it's done. And what you could see is that all the values are covered. So this is the end of the first exercise. You can work around it to basically improve or play around or add functionalities to get more familiar with the coding of VBA if the first time that you do that. But now we are going to switch to the second exercise where we are going to generate all these scenarios. Okay, so now we can start the second exercise. And I would say for most of the time, the type of applications that I had when I was solution designer using Excel and with VBA were more close to these kind of applications. Because basically, I mean, Excel is already very good to do some calculations. So what you need is to transform a static worksheet into something more dynamic. And this is how this is where VBA has this kind of added value. Because what happened is that when my colleagues needed to do some sizing or quotation with multiple scenarios, they were creating multiple worksheets or workbooks for sometimes. For me, I just had to keep the same workbook with all the statics calculations that I understand, that I know, and then create this kind of mechanism, with all these scenarios and run it using the macro. So this is what we are going to do here. And the macro will be way simpler than the one that we had before. So let's go back here. We want to create a new one. So we call that run scenarios. We want to create that. Okay. So here, what I'm going to do is the same way that we had before, I will define the different parameters. So I can even copy them. So declare the variables. So the first variable is the worksheet where we are. And here, this worksheet will be the worksheet where we have the scenarios. So now that we know that we can directly define the variable in the row. So let me I don't have, okay, wait a second. So yes, that way for you, it's clearer. So WS will be worksheets, and here it will be, I think, scenarios. We have defined that. Here, we need a variable you know, for the for loop that will go from the column C to the column X. But we are going to use the sales function, so it's going to be an integer. So maybe let's call that C as long. And yeah, that would be the variable for the index. I mean, you can call that index of column for the for loop. Yes, now we're good. We can start the for loop. So for C starting from, let me just go back here. So the third column to the 24th. 3 to 24. So what do we want to do? Let me just remind you. We want here, that gives you the index of the current calculation, right? Of the current scenario. So here we are in the scenario 1. So we want to change this index from 1 to 22. Because if you take 20, for instance, here you take the value of this column. So here we are in WS, the cell, sorry. So the cell 3, which column is it? I forgot. Column 26. So, if you look, it's upright. 26 will be equal to WS cells. So here it will be the same row, 3, but now it will be in the column C. Maybe define scenario ID, I call that. So what do we want? So now we have set up the right scenario. So the calculation will be updated. So here, unlike the previous one, we need the calculation to be updated. So I can even ask here application.calculate just to make sure that the spreadsheet is updating based on the new scenario selected. And you have another function that calls do events. Here, in case that you have like other like pivot table or other functionalities that are used and requires like calculation. So then, now we are sure that the values are updated. So what do we need? Let me go back here. The results will be calculated here. So what we need to do is to copy these results to the right column. So here, for instance, column V for the scenario 20. So for that, we can use the range. If you remember well, that's the one that we have defined in the previous, that means we have discovered in the recording when we were using the recording tool. And you know, here in the range, you can use the letters with the numbers, but you can also use the cells. So here it would be the cells. I mean, I always forget. Between the cells, so here it will be row 18 and column C. Row 18 and column C. Because you want to copy. You want to get these values. So for instance, let's say that we are columns 20. We want to take the values from here to here that equals the values from here to here. So row 18, column C from row 29. WS cells 29C. Okay, so we want to set a value. So let's not forget to put, value here will be equal to WS. And here we can use range, But here we don't have parameters, so it will be Z18 to Z29. Okay. Are we good now? No, because we need to close the loop. And now we should be good. So wait, I don't like it because it's not clean. Okay. You know what? Let's try with only 5, right? Even if it's not huge volume. It's not working. It's definitely not working. I don't understand why. And when we don't understand why, what do we do? Wait a second. Did I run the right one? Run scenario. Debug. Oh. Okay. I did a mistake here. So with block variable not set. And okay, I don't understand why, but anyhow, if I do this, it should be working. And now, instead of running it, I will debug. With block variable not set. Wow. Names. Our worksheets. Holy shit. What's happening here? You see? I forgot to set. But I don't get here why it was not working. Anyhow, I had some issues. Yeah, so my syntax was not correct. Okay, now it's working. Okay, so now we have set up the value here to C. So it should be 1. Yeah, well, it was probably 1. We update the calculation and we copy. And it's not working. Could you see here? It's not working. It was supposed to copy the values here to here. And now I give you an example of how to debug and what is the life of someone programming in VBA that basically self-learned. But it's okay. I can understand. I will find out why. Yes. This is it. Great. Let me try again. So now C equals to 4. Yeah, it's done. So the problem was on the I forgot value. Let's see. Okay. I delete the values here. I run the scenarios. Boom. Wow, it's working quite well. Run scenarios. And now instead of, I put 24 to have the complete calculation, all the scenarios. And if we run, So here we don't have this optimization that we had before where we don't update the calculation because, yeah, I wanted you to see how things are working. But now, yeah, the job is done. I know, for instance, that could be scenario one. So let's see, for instance, let's compare everything to scenario one. So that's minus, and we divide by this. Hop. You can compare all the different scenarios versus scenario one. And that's the kind of applications that I had when I was solution designer because, yeah, my boss was asking me, what if, what if, what if? Now with VBA, you can answer to all the what if your manager, your decision maker, your director has in mind using kind of automation with VBA where you have used a simple spreadsheet to put all the different scenarios, create the calculation inside Excel and use only VBA to basically run all the different scenarios, copy and paste the values. That's probably for me the best application of VBA. Of course, you can do more advanced calculations, but that's not the way I was using it at, because if I want to do advanced calculation, I was using Python. So this is why probably, and you see that I did so many mistakes because I don't use VBA that much for the calculation. And now that I have Python, I'm a bit more familiar to Python than to VBA. But for you, and if we can conclude this tutorial, now, if you are quite new in programming, you have the core, I would say, foundations on how to use VBA to perform some automations in the context of supply chain logistics, on any other contexts. And if you have any question about the tutorial, feel free to use the comment section, and see you for the next one.